Are you really holding up a holiday checkpoint over an old jacket? The Marine captain scoffed as a lantern rope clicked against the frosted arch. The crowd pressing in while the man in the worn coat lowered his eyes under the weight of judgment. But when a faint glint from the patch beneath his collar caught the amber light, the noise collapsed into a thin silence where even a heartbeat felt loud. Still quiet men leave echoes too. Let me take you back. The line for the holiday entry checkpoint stretched beneath the frosted archway, glowing faintly under strings of lanterns shaped like pine cones. Ray Mercer moved with the patience of someone who'd seen many winters come and go. His old jacket pulled tight against the cold. The coat had once been deep forest green, but time had worn it thin, leaving patches of threadbare fabric and a sheen along the collar where the fibers had grown smooth. He inched forward with the crowd boots scraping lightly against the salted pavement as the choir down the lane tested microphones, a burst of warm harmony drifting through the air. From her post near the booth, Captain Jenna Pike watched him with a level stare. She ran holiday operations with an eye for order, her clipboard tucked against her ribs like a badge. When she spotted Ray's jacket, her brows drew together, a flicker of irritation crossing her face, as if the worn coat itself were a disruption. "Sir," she called, stepping closer. "That old jacket looks ragged. Please step aside." Ray paused, shifting his weight. "I'm just heading to the market, Captain," he said quietly. His voice steady, almost gentle. "This is a checkpoint," she replied. "Don't hold the line." A man behind Ray exhaled sharply, annoyed. Someone farther back muttered about people coming unprepared for holiday screenings. The smell of cinnamon drifted over from the bakery tent, warm and sweet, but it didn't soften the moment. Ray nodded once, an almost imperceptible gesture, and stepped out of place without argument. "We can't delay holiday entry because of one old coat," Pike said loudly to the crowd, her words carrying more force than her tone. Evan Cole, a 14-year-old near the rope barrier, glanced up at Ray with puzzled concern. "Why'd she say that to you?" he asked, his voice small but clear enough to be heard. Ray offered the faintest smile. "People get busy during the season," he said, as if that explained everything. As he shifted aside, adjusting the strap of his canvas bag, sliver of silver caught the lantern light, just a momentary flash from beneath the folds of his coat. Evan saw it, eyes narrowing with curiosity. It vanished again just as quickly when Ray tugged the jacket closed. He pulled the collar higher around his neck, breath turning to pale mist in the cold. The choir ran another test down the street, the sound wobbling through the speakers before settling into a warm hum. A breeze carried the scent of pine brushing lightly against Ray's sleeve. For a heartbeat, he stood still as if letting the noise and motion flow around him without touching him. Then the line shuffles forward. The checkpoint lights flickered again, a stuttering blink that cast uneven shadows across the pavement. A moment later, the loudspeaker crackled, cutting off halfway through a welcome message for arriving visitors. People in line groaned, shifting impatiently as the cold deepened. Ray Mercer stood a few steps off to the side where Captain Pike had directed him, hands tucked into the pockets of his old jacket. The fabric rustled softly as he drew the zipper a little higher, trying to keep the wind from slipping through the worn seams. Captain Pike marched toward him, jaw set. "Sir, zip up that coat. It might confuse the scanners." Ray met her eyes briefly, then looked down at the frayed front of his jacket. "It's just old fabric, Captain. That thing looks 20 years old," a driver called from the line, waving a hand in irritation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, sharp and restless. Someone muttered about holiday backups. Another complained about people who don't follow simple instructions. Ray didn't respond. He simply adjusted the collar and stepped a little farther from the main queue. The air smelled of pine wreaths and fresh kettle corn, but the tension near the booth made the festive aromas feel strangely out of place. The checkpoint lights blinked again, off-beat, off-rhythm, as if the system itself were growing frustrated. Evan Cole drifted closer, curiosity tugging him forward. He studied Ray's coat, peering at the uneven stitching and faded patches along the sleeves. When Ray shifted his arm, a small glint of silver slipped from beneath the fabric. "It has a little picture on it," Evan said, trying to catch another glimpse. Ray didn't answer right away. He gently pressed the edge of the coat, closed the motion, calm, almost protective. "Just an old thing," he said. "Why is this man slowing everyone down?" Someone snapped from behind the rope line. Others echoed the sentiment, words sharp enough to cut through the winter air. Captain Pike lifted her clipboard as if it were a shield against disorder, scanning the malfunctioning monitors with growing irritation. A pickup rumbled past on the road beside the market, its windows fogged from the heater running full blast. The driver had the radio on, and a soft instrumental version of Autumn Leaves drifted from the speakers, warm and nostalgic, floating over the cold scene, like a gentle reminder of quieter days. For a brief second, Ray's gaze followed the truck, as though the familiar tune steadied him. Behind him, the loudspeaker sputtered to life again, then died with a metallic cough. The lights flickered in response, pulses tightening into a dissonant pattern. Ray tilted his head, listening. He stepped a half-inch closer to the booth, just enough to hear the relay inside clicking in a rhythm that didn't match the usual cadence. He lowered his chin, focusing on the faint sequence of sounds. The crowd waited restless. Captain Pike tapped her pen against the clipboard, watching Ray with growing suspicion. Ray kept listening. He recognized something in the uneven beat and instability building inside the grid, a subtle misalignment creeping through the system. He exhaled slowly, breath white against the air, and continued to study the blinking lights, the way their pattern faltered, recovered, and faltered again. Still, the lights blink off-beat. The system was starting to breathe wrong. The line had frozen in place, the entire checkpoint stalled under the dim glow of holiday lanterns. A looping chime stuttered from the control panel, repeating the same halftone again and again, as if the system couldn't decide whether to continue or quit altogether. People shifted in the cold, their murmurs rising with every passing second. Even the choir farther down the avenue stopped warming up, noticing the odd silence spreading from the entry gate. Captain Pike jabbed a finger at the console. "Great, just great," she muttered. Then turned sharply toward Ray Mercer. "Sir, open your coat." "What's hidden in there?" Ray's expression didn't change. He simply unfastened one glove and held his hands slightly away from his sides. "Just an old patch, nothing more." "That's not an answer," Pike snapped. "You've been near the booth every time the system glitches. You expect me to believe that's a coincidence?" Before Ray could reply, Evan stepped closer, his breath puffing out in pale clouds. "He didn't even touch the booth," he said, voice louder than before. "I was watching. He hasn't gone near anything." People nearby turned eyes, narrowing first at Evan, then at Ray. The weight of the crowd's suspicion moved like a slow tide, pulling focus toward him. Someone murmured that the old man must have something under that ragged jacket. Another wondered aloud if he was messing with the scanner on purpose. Ray didn't look at them. His attention had shifted again to the blinking lights on the overhead bar. They weren't flickering randomly. Now they were following a pattern, but the wrong one. The cadence was off, like a song being played out of order. He angled his head and listened, the way someone might listen to an engine to tell whether it was about to seize. "Your relay's looping the wrong cycle, Captain," he said, finally. Voice calm, almost soft. Pike stared at him. "And how would you know that?" He didn't answer, not directly. Instead, he watched the sequence again, blink, blink, pause, blink, pause, blink, blink, far too familiar for comfort. The hum inside the panel deepened, a low vibration slipping through the metal frame and into the pavement under their feet. The wind picked up just then, nudging the paper stars strung across the entry arch. They swung gently, tapping together, with a faint clinking sound that seemed to echo the irregular rhythm of the failing system. Evan glanced up at them, then back at Ray, as if sensing something unspoken passing between man and machine. "Look," Pike said, folding her arms. "I don't know what you're trying to do, but you need to step away. The crowd is nervous enough. I can't have you interfering." Ray didn't move. He kept watching the lights, tracing the sequence with his eyes. Beneath the soft lantern glow, the edge of his jacket shifted, and for a moment, a clearer glimpse of the silver patch underneath became visible just long enough for Evan to catch it before Ray pulled the coat back into place. Captain Evan said, his voice small but firm. "He's trying to help." But Pike shakes her head. The murmurs grew louder. A woman pointed at Ray, whispering that he should be searched. A man near the barricade insisted the authorities take his name. The pressure in the air tightened, as if suspicion itself had weight. Ray lowered his head slightly, listening once more. The glow from the panel pulsed harder, each beat sharper than the last. He recognized the pattern in full now, the way the system strained before a complete lockup. The way the loops shortened right before the whole circuit froze. He drew a slow breath, rough with the cold, and let it out. Something in the system was about to snap. The wind cut through the checkpoint as the crowd pressed in the cold air, thick with impatience. Captain Pike stood rigid beside the malfunctioning booth, her breath sharp, her jaw tight. When the relay looped again with a metallic stutter, she tapped her earpiece and called for support. Within minutes, a dark sedan rolled up to the barricade. Its lights dimmed its arrival, quiet but commanding. Director Harold Briggs stepped out with the slow assurance of someone long accustomed to responsibility. His gray coat brushed the ground, and his steady gaze swept the scene, the frozen line, the blinking control panel, the anxious faces. People straightened without realizing it. Even Pike stiffened further, smoothing her uniform. "Director," she said quickly, "thank you for coming. We've had repeated malfunctions and, well, this gentleman has been near the booth each time." Briggs didn't answer right away. He studied Ray Mercer, who stood a few feet off to the side, one hand resting lightly on the metal casing of the panel. Ray's old jacket looked almost out of place next to Briggs' tailored coat, faded, weathered and frayed around the shoulders. The cold metallic scent of the equipment hung between them. "What seems to be the issue?" Briggs asked, stepping closer to the panel. "The relay's trapped in a loop." Ray said, his voice calm. "It's cycling through a pattern it shouldn't." Pike frowned. "He claims to know what the problem is, Director. But he's been acting suspiciously. I've asked him to open that coat. He says there's just a patch inside." Briggs knelt beside the panel, examining the access bay. Ray took a step forward to help, bending down to point toward the wiring. As he did, the edge of his old jacket fell open, just enough for the overhead lanterns to catch on a circular patch beneath the lining silver thread, worn soft by time, the emblem muted but unmistakable. Briggs froze. His eyes locked on the patch. His breath caught almost imperceptibly. "I know that patch," he said, voice lowered as if speaking to a memory. Pike blinked, the truth hitting her like cold water. She looked from the emblem to Ray, unsteady. "Director, you recognize it?" Briggs rose slowly. He faced Pike, but his gaze drifted back to Ray as he spoke. "He kept the state network alive during the Black Winters," he said. "When the grid failed, when half the counties went dark, this man kept the lines talking." The crowd fell silent. Even the wind paused, as if listening. Ray didn't respond, only crouched again beside the open panel. His movements were deliberate, practiced. He reached inside with careful fingers, rerouting a single wire, twisting another into place with a steady grip. The malfunctioning hum faltered, then softened as the rhythm began to align. Pike stepped back, stunned into stillness. The pressure she'd used to corner Ray all afternoon now weighed on her instead. He hadn't resisted it. He had simply endured it. Ray wasn't pushed, only pressed down by the weight of protocol. Briggs knelt beside him. "Where did you get that patch?" he asked, the respect in his voice unmistakable. Ray offered a faint smile, just a crease at the corner of his mouth. "Long story, sir, from years back." The choir down the street began running another test of "O Holy Night," the echo drifting through the chilly air, soft and solemn. The golden light from the lanterns caught Ray's hands as he tightened the final connection. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then the whole panel hums steady. Lights across the checkpoint stabilized, glowing with renewed clarity. The loudspeaker crackled back to life, finishing the message it had tried to play for the past 10 minutes. A ripple of relief passed through the waiting line. Briggs stood, placing a hand gently on the worn edge of Ray's jacket, brushing the frayed threads with a quiet reverence. His eyes held more gratitude than words could offer. Pike watched her face pale under the lantern glow, the weight of her misjudgment sinking into her posture. Ray straightened, closing the panel gently. The lanterns reflected off the newly revealed emblem beneath his coat, making it shine softly in the cold evening air. Recognition changes everything. The checkpoint settled into a hush after the panel revived the glow from the overhead lanterns, warming the faces of people who had spent the last half hour grumbling in the cold. Now those same faces shifted, first with relief, then with something closer to shame. Captain Pike stepped forward, each footfall slow, as if she were choosing her steps with care. Her clipboard hung limp at her side. The rigid confidence she carried earlier softened into something humbler. She cleared her throat. Everyone she called, raising her voice just enough to carry through the waiting line. "I need your attention." The murmurs faded. A few people looked toward Ray, some already guessing what was coming. Pike turned fully toward him. "Mr. Mercer, I dismissed you because of that old jacket. I was wrong." The words lingered in the frosty air, tender and striking all at once. Ray stood quietly, hands at his sides, the worn coat still half open from when he'd knelt to repair the relay. The faded fabric fluttered as a light gust moved through. Somewhere behind him, the kettle corn vendor paused mid-scoop, watching. Ray gave a small shake of his head. "Holiday weeks get stressful. It's all right." But Pike wasn't finished. She looked back at the crowd, her voice steadying as she addressed them. This man helped keep the entry grid from collapsing completely. Director Briggs confirmed it himself. The patch on his jacket? She hesitated, regret flickering across her face. "I should have recognized it as a mark of service. I didn't. And that's on me." A low wave of murmured agreement passed through the line. But this time the tone had changed. Instead of suspicion, there was gratitude, warm, if a little embarrassed. A man near the front stepped out just enough to make eye contact with Ray. "Thanks for getting us moving again," he said. "Yeah." Someone else added, a woman clutching a bag of holiday candles. "We shouldn't have snapped at you." Another voice chimed in. "Appreciate what you did, sir." Evan came running up, then weaving between two families bundled in matching scarves. His cheeks were red from the cold, but his smile shone bright. "I knew you were helping," he said, breathless with pride. Ray looked down at him, the corners of his eyes softening. "Just lending a hand," he replied. The choir down the avenue began testing a few lines from a carol, their voices blending in tentative harmonies that drifted over the crowd. The melody rose and fell gently, brushing the edges of the scene with a sense of home and holiday warmth. Ray lifted one hand to his coat fingertips, brushing the frayed edge where the patch hid beneath the lining. He didn't pull it aside or draw attention to it. He merely touched the spot a quiet moment to himself, as if acknowledging years that no one else could see. The lanterns flickered above him, reflecting off the smooth patches of threadbare cloth. For a moment the light caught the old jacket in just the right angle, casting it in a soft glow. People noticed the shift, not dramatic, but subtle enough to feel like a small turning of the page. Yet Ray simply steps back. He didn't step forward to take praise, didn't gesture or correct anyone. The market gate had resumed its steady glow, and he let the crowd move on, as if he were just another visitor in line. A few people nodded to him as they passed. Some offered warm smiles. Pike lingered unsure whether to say more, but Ray gave her an assuring nod. Evan stayed beside him, his excitement still bubbling. "She was wrong about you," he said quietly. Everyone was. Ray looked toward the lanterns swaying in the breeze, the soft strain of the choir lifting again. His breath rose in the cold as he answered, "People get things wrong sometimes. What matters is they get it right when it counts." The boy nodded, absorbing the words as if they were part of some lesson he'd carry for years. A small gust of wind brushed past, stirring Ray's jacket once more and letting a sliver of the silver emblem peek out again. It glimmered briefly, humble worn and undeniably present. But the night still had one more quiet truth. Snow fell in slow, unhurried flakes over red pines the next morning, settling along the rooftops and the wooden beams of the winter market gate. A new board stood just to the right of the checkpoint. Simple pine wood sanded and varnished its brass screws, catching the pale winter light. People slowed as they entered, reading the neat lettering carved into the top for the quiet work that kept red pines moving, R. Mercer. A few nodded quietly before stepping into the bustle of warm drinks and holiday stalls. The board didn't announce anything loudly. It just waited steady and honest like the man it honored. Evan Cole stood beneath it, tugging his gloves on and off as he examined the patch he'd stitched the night before. The silver thread wasn't perfect. Some lines wavered, some loops tugged, but in the morning light, it glimmered with earnest effort. He bit his lip, then gave a tiny nod of approval. Ray arrived along the side walkway, boots tapping through the thin layer of snow. His jacket looked even older in daylight, the softened fabric lifting slightly whenever the wind brushed past. When he noticed Evan by the board, he stopped beside him with a small smile. "Morning, kiddo," Ray said. Evan brightened. "I fixed the patch, well, I made a new one since the old one's super worn. I thought maybe it could go here." He held it up proudly. Ray took a quiet breath, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, son. That's real kind." Evan beamed and climbed onto the small wooden step someone had placed under the board. He pinned the patch to the lower corner, smoothing the fabric until it lay flat. A couple passing by paused to watch, one whispering, "That's him, the man who fixed the grid last night." Their tone held the soft respect people use when speaking near something sacred. From the checkpoint booth, Captain Jenna Pike hesitated before walking over. The morning cold had slowed everything down, even her posture. She approached Ray with a gentleness that hadn't been there the night before. When she reached him, she looked at his jacket, not with suspicion, not with command, but with understanding. "We'll remember that old jacket differently now," she said quietly. Ray shrugged lightly, a smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. "It's just been around a long time. Some things last because they should," she replied, A breeze lifted, carrying the metallic music of a nearby wind chime. Old spoons and copper washers ringing softly in the cold air. The choir near the gazebo was warming up again, humming the opening notes of a carol that drifted carefully across the square. Families passed by carrying cocoa. Children laughed as they chased each other through the dusting of snow. And the morning settled into its familiar holiday rhythm. Ray stepped back, taking in the wooden board, the patch, and the people moving through the entryway. His old jacket hung comfortably at his sides. Edge's frayed fabric faded, but it felt lighter somehow, as if the weight it carried had finally been seen for what it was. He pulled his collar up against the falling snow and turned toward the market path. Still, he walked on quietly. Behind him the chimes rang again, soft and steady, as the patch on the board caught a glint of winter sun. If this story moved you, share it forward. Snow drifted gently around the winter market gate, where Ray paused beside the wooden board, carrying his name, the new patch stitched by Evan, shining softly like a small lantern in the cold. Still he took in the morning sounds, the choir warming up, the wind chime ringing faintly, and let the kindness of the night before settle around him with the quiet weight of a long-awaited breath. The town moved easily now, each passer-by offering a nod of respect, and the old jacket that once drew suspicion seemed to stand as a reminder that steady hands often do their work unseen. Then as Ray lifted his collar and stepped into the slow snowfall, the board behind him glowed like a winter window left lit for travelers who keep their promises in silence. And in that soft light the restored patch whispered its small truth: quiet honor carries further than anyone sees.